Hello, everyone. Today I'm here with Tim. Thank you for joining us, Tim.
Yep, great to
Um,
be here.
I have a bunch of questions lined up, but I just wanted to start with asking you briefly what you do and what you've done.
So that's a great question and not a simple answer. I let's see, my I'll give you the thumbnail full history. My in high school in the '80s, I was a computer hacker and a kind of a math physics kid. And then I went to liberal arts college at Sarah Lawrence College. Did no math, no science, no social science, pure humanities, um, literature, philosophy. Was the baritone soloist for the choir. Um, But at the end of that, stumbled into a job doing geographic information systems for Westchester County, which no one was doing yet. It actually first was an architectural history internship, and then it turned out they had this computer they didn't know how to use. I was like, well, I could turn that on for you. And 10 years later, I was still the technical director of the Westchester County GIS. Um, but during that time, it went from being basically a research job. What can this thing do? To an operations job. Is this done according to best practice? Did you do it the same way this year you did last year? Are there any spelling mistakes? I don't enjoy that kind of work nearly as much. And so I decided if I was going to do work that I didn't know how to do, but nobody else knew how to do either, I either needed to start a business, which I didn't have the money or the stomach for risk for, or get a PhD. So I got a PhD in public policy. Um, and uh, I suppose I'm an expert in agent-based modeling and complex systems, but particularly in geographic contexts, looking at human populations. And spent the last 10 years working at the RAND Corporation, where I was a senior policy researcher. I worked on a lot of different things, including things that are well outside my scope, but that's kind of how those kind of think tanks are. And left there in November and am waiting to almost certainly start a job with a startup doing large scale synthetic population synthesis and modeling using those populations.
Very interesting. So, what do those agent-based models do? Because there's so many different ones. Are there any that you like focusing on, or any that you find the most interesting?
Well, I mean, the granddaddy of agent-based models, I would say, the one that everybody refers back to and that is incredibly instructive, is Thomas Schelling's neighborhood segregation model. And I was extremely fortunate to have him as a teacher in graduate school in the early 2000s at the University of Maryland. And so I got to work with him directly, and he was on my dissertation committee. And he won the Nobel Prize for economics the year after I defended my dissertation, making me instantly twice as smart, which was great. Um, and in that model, it's a very simple model of uh, you've got red agents and blue agents on a checkerboard, and each one of them looks at their immediate neighborhood and counts up their neighbors, and they're happy if some percentage is like them, and they're unhappy if some percentage is not like them. And you can play with those percentages. The fascinating insight is that even if it's just a very weak preference, they just don't want to be outnumbered. I don't mind if it's the same number of blue and red near me, but I don't want there to be more. If I'm blue, I don't want there to be more red than blue. You'd think that would result in, okay, people have a 51% preference for their own sort. You'd think you'd get 51% segregation. You don't. You get like 80% segregation.
Oh, wow.
You get way more segregation than anybody wants.
Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, basically, when you first set the board up randomly, most people are happy, but
Mhm.
a few people aren't. And the ones that just by chance are outnumbered move, reducing the number of people like them in the neighborhood. And now somebody else is unhappy. And then they leave, and then somebody else becomes unhappy. And meanwhile, the area they moved to, somebody was happy, but they moved in and made one of their neighbors of the other sort not happy. And so then they moved. And so the logic of the situation means that instead of, you see strong segregation in the world,
Yeah.
and it's tempting to think that's a revealed preference. That's somehow what people want. That's at least what somebody wants. And what this shows is it certainly doesn't show that there's no racism in the world. I mean, there is, and he had black white race relations in the U.S. in mind when he did this, but it's very general. Um, what it shows is it takes only weak racism to make strong segregation. That if you're not actively trying to be, you know, anti-racist, you end up with powerfully racist outcomes in terms of segregation. And you can generalize this to things other than housing position. Um, and that just blew everybody's mind. That I mean, I think that just went like a kind of a lightning bolt through economics in the 70s, where it had just been assumed that what you see in the world is a revealed preference.
Mhm.
And this just completely blows that out of the water. That
Changes everything you thought.
it's a result. I mean, it does mean that people are not thinking fairly, but the
Yeah.
result is so much less fair than anybody wants. You realize you know there are things like systemic racism. You have to
Yeah.
really think about the system. You can't just think about the individual people.
It almost doesn't make sense because you're so surprised the outcome in a way.
Yeah, I mean the great thing about it is that it's so simple. Like he
Yeah.
did it originally with nickels and pennies on a checkerboard before there were computers. Um, I of course did it with NetLogo and I did it with computers. And um, but once you've seen it, it becomes obvious.
Mhm.
And it just
Yeah.
takes working through it a time or two before you realize, oh yeah, of course that's how it
And
works.
then you
And that
understand.
that I mean that's the reason why Schelling won the Nobel Prize is that he had a number of things he described where in hindsight it's obvious. And I mean he always claimed to not be all that smart. Um, he was like, no, most economists are smarter than me. I just have a knack for simplifying problems so that they're easy.
Smart.
Yeah, that's a different kind of smart. That's in fact a better kind of smart. That's called being a
For
genius.
sure.
Yeah,
Helps out a lot more.
yeah,
So, do these models also help businesses in the real world?
absolutely. I mean, they do get used for things like supply chain.
Mhm.
Um, uh, I mean, a closely related sort of model, uh, system dynamics model, is that's MIT has kind of been the hotbed of system dynamics modeling for the past 30 years or so. Um, John Sturman has a famous textbook, and he has something called the beer game that's played with actual participants. You can do it. You can do it in a room with 30 people, and people are trying to they're getting orders. You're either the just manufacturer or the warehouse or the distributor or the retailer, and everybody's having to place orders and try to keep their inventory at the right level. It turns out to be very hard to do. Uh, and at the end of the exercise, everyone's asked to draw what they thought the demand or the supply curve looked like. Not the curve, but the over time. Did
Mhm.
people start demanding, wanting more beer or wanting less beer? The manufacturers trying to understand what the customers are doing, and the customers are trying to guess what the manufacturers are doing. Um, it turns out there's no dynamics; it's just flat, and everybody thinks that oh well, it was really low, and then it was really high, and then it crashed, and it's all just dynamics in the supply chain. And sometimes you can do that with differential equations. You can do fancy math and kind of solve it. But the problem is if you do that, you can only talk to other mathematicians about it. No one else can read the
Understand it.
notation. Nobody knows what you're doing.
Yeah.
By simulating either with agents or with these kind of simple differential equations that are in a computer program, so you don't really need to even know that they're differential equations. You just know what affects what, how. Um, yeah, a person who isn't a specialist can kind of work through the situation and get a feel for what's going on. That can be pretty powerful. I mean, another great application area that was pretty business relevant was I did some work during the pandemic at Rand where we actually got access to an amazing set of cell phone data. It was from one of the companies that harvests harvests your private information. Anytime you have a weather app installed,
Yeah.
for instance, that you let use your location in the background,
Mhm.
so that it can tell you when it's going to rain, for instance.
Yeah.
Usually, you've clicked through somewhere where you said it's okay for the developer to share my data with its partners. I became one of their partners. So this company collected from like 300 different apps people's locations and sold that to advertisers for a lot. And they gave it to us for close to free because of pandemic. It was important. And we got it actually with no jittering. We got the actual locations. So we actually
Yeah.
knew where three-quarters of the cell phones in the Portland, Oregon area were, um, for 2 weeks before and 2 weeks after the first big lockdown. And they didn't all, some of them reported every minute, and some of them only reported, every couple of days. So there was a lot of data cleanup to be done. But we basically had a sense of the movement patterns of three-quarters of the population of Portland.
It's
And actually,
crazy.
that's probably more than three. Well, that is more than three-quarters of the adult population.
Yeah.
You get children that don't have phones and things. So it was almost everybody.
Yeah.
And from that, we were able, through a lot of data manipulation, to come up with a contact network. Who came within 10 meters of whom in the 2 weeks before and the 2 weeks after? And we took 2 weeks of data and folded it down to a single day kind of representative movement pattern. So, how likely are you to be one place or another, derived from 2 weeks worth of data? And then we could build an agent-based model on top of this whole network of who came near whom, and say, okay, if you come within 10 meters, there's some chance of transmission.
Yeah.
We couldn't model that really precisely.
Which makes sense.
Uh, it was fascinating. You got, an outbreak, and then it would calm down to nothing, but not quite nothing, and percolate along. And then another big outbreak, and then die down. And then another big outbreak. And that was all just from the network structure.
You can get a
And
lot from just that information.
yeah, it was things like, say, a mega church. People go about their lives, but then they go to church and sing. And it turns out during the pandemic, the most dangerous thing you could do
Thing.
was sing in church,
Yeah.
which isn't that supposed to be the safest thing you could possibly do?
Yeah.
But it turns out you're
Yeah.
spewing, lung stuff all over the place. So people go to church in a room with 2,000 people, and they sing at the top of their lungs. They make each other sick, and they're very active people in the community. They're at the homeless shelter. They're looking after elderly people. They're doing all the good social things that church tells you ought to do.
Yeah.
And so not only are they more likely to get sick because they're in this environment where everybody's singing, but they're also out having contact with vulnerable people all the time
So more
to
likely
help
to
them.
get those people sick.
So we actually see these events where you've got a bunch of people coming together, but those people are high contact people. Not only do they come in contact with each other, but they come in contact with a bunch of other people too. And so that would show up just in our data without us assuming anything. We don't even know we don't know what it is.
Yeah.
But boom, there was this event where suddenly all these people who have lots of contact with people had contact with each other, and somebody was sick. And now suddenly we've got all these other cases all of a sudden when things had been quiet.
That's
It
so
really
cool how you
explained a
can
lot
see
about the
that.
texture we saw. And then we could do the big result we got from it. I don't know how much the attention the world paid was, if you only have enough vaccine to vaccinate some people,
Yeah.
10% of the people, who do you vaccinate? Do you vaccinate the old people who are most likely to die if they get sick? Or do you vaccinate the active people?
Who are spreading it more because they're going to meet more people.
Right. The frat boys who won't stay home, who are going to party
Yeah.
no matter what. They're young enough, they're not going to die,
No,
but they're hugely dangerous when they go visit grandma.
because they spread
Grandma's
it
going to
to
die.
everyone.
Right. You don't want, so really, and what we could show was that because each case led on to other cases, you protected old people better by vaccinating young active people than you did by vaccinating old people.
Because the old people didn't go out as much and have that contact that the younger people did.
That's right. That's right.
So cool you can see all that from just the model.
Yeah, I mean, we had to make some assumptions, right? We
Yeah.
didn't know how old people were.
Yeah.
We did know where they lived. Yeah, we knew where their phone slept,
Yeah.
which meant that we had to treat the data like classified data.
Yeah.
Because, if you
You
want to know
can,
where, oh, well, what's Carrie Brownstein been doing for the last, she's, an actor who lives in Portland, if
yeah.
she, you could look up where she lives. Okay, there's her phone. Where else does she go? Right? You can't. I mean, we were able to do it because we all had security clearances and we had ways to keep track of
Yeah.
that data so that it wouldn't leak out. But it
Other than
was
that.
would have been really easy to abuse that. But
Wow.
yeah, so we didn't know though. Now you could pay an advertiser could pay for enhancement, and they could actually find out who owns that phone, how old are they, what do they shop for. Um, it's expensive, but you find that if your phone is reporting regularly, at least it can happen. You go with a friend to look at a car at a car dealership, you'll start seeing ads for that car and competing cars just because you spent 10 minutes near a car dealership. So that kind of stuff is known and there's a brisk market for it.
Yeah. It's crazy. It's
Yeah.
interesting though.
Yeah. So that was that was a really impactful model. I don't know how much the US paid attention, but I have a friend in Peru that uh, was in the government and is at the university, and he did get that considered. That if you're gonna send a mobile vaccination van into a Peruvian village somewhere,
Yeah.
um, don't go around looking for all the people hiding at home. Go on market day and just vaccinate everybody you can find. That will crush it. Those are the people you need to vaccinate,
Because
and they're the easy ones to vaccinate.
the people stuck at home aren't
They're
having the
pretty safe.
contact. Yeah.
So long as their son doesn't come home and make them sick.
Yeah.
So if the son's going to the market, vaccinate the son.
Him.
Yeah.
Which makes total sense when you think about it.
Right. And it's not the way we were thinking about it for the
No,
most
it
part. We
wasn't
were thinking about vaccinating
at
people
all.
by, how much they deserved it or how vulnerable they were.
Yeah.
And those are both actually not
Mm,
good
doesn't
reasons to
make sense
vaccinate
when
someone.
you have
How much is it going to slow down the spread? That's what you want to do.
interesting
And yeah, I mean, wearing masks. I was constantly telling people, look, we don't wear masks to protect ourselves. We wear masks to protect others.
others.
It's not even about not inhaling the particles.
It's about
It's
not
about
exiting.
not exhaling the
Yeah,
particles. That's what the mask is for. So saying, "Oh, I'm willing to take the risk. I don't need to wear a mask." It's like, it's not really up to you.
that's true.
You're endangering other people. That's the point.
That's true.
Yeah.
Wow. So can these models also, like talking more about the business side, can the models
Mm-hmm.
tell you how to price things, sell things? What can the models do for businesses?
I mean, that isn't my biggest strength, but I can say, like, one of the leading practitioners of agent-based modeling, a guy named Bill Rand at where is he now? He was at University of North Carolina. I think he's somewhere else now. I forget where Bill is, but anyway, Bill Rand, no relation to the Rand Corporation, completely different Rand, is actually a professor of marketing, um, and he uses agent-based models um, to understand marketing issues. In fact, I saw him speak a month or two ago. He gave a talk at Lehigh. My wife is a professor, and he was actually, I remember exactly what it was. He was basically looking at neuroscience, at activation of different centers in the brain in response to different kinds of pictures, and then looking at how that led to, I think, to kind of viral, like, do people talk? Do people tell each other? How do people's decisions and social decisions relate to activation of different brain areas? Very sophisticated, sophisticated enough it was hard to hard to remember exactly what he was talking about, but it definitely can be useful in understanding things like opinion dynamics, product adoption. I mean, it's kind of weird that you come up with a new device, or a new software program or something, and then you have to do all this marketing.
Yeah.
You like to think, if we build a better mousetrap, the world will beat a path to your door. Well, it might not. And the modern world, and of course, they say that half of every advertising dollar is wasted, but nobody knows which half. Uh, so it is a way to try to understand how something can go viral. What kind of person are you trying to put this in front of? Um, where can you put the seeds to get the word of mouth to actually spread? That kind of question can be you can get some traction on with an agent-based model.
So with the models you've worked for or worked with or created, how reliable, or in general that you've seen, how reliable would you say these models are? Like, are they 100%? Do they make mistakes?
It depends on what you want it to do. If you're trying to predict something, if you're trying to predict exactly what's going to happen, they're almost 100% not reliable. They don't do that. What they're good for is understanding why, um, and also understanding kind of qualitatively how something works. Like for instance, if a if you're trying to do viral marketing and you advertise for a couple of weeks, you don't see a lot of sales. Does that mean it's not working? Or is there, are you on some kind of curve that's gonna be flat for a while and then take off? And you wouldn't expect anything in the first couple of weeks. Is it going to be linear, or is it going to have some kind of crazy thing? Is it going to go up and level off? So looking for these kinds of thresholds and feedbacks can be really powerful to say that when this happens, it's going to happen suddenly. Or if we don't see something right away, we're probably never going to see anything. That kind of qualitative insight is usually what's best.
Okay.
For instance, my COVID model, I couldn't calibrate that well enough to tell you how a change in infectiousness would change the number of people that would die,
Yeah.
or the number of people that would get sick. But I could tell you that a small change in infectiousness could have a big impact or not. Or I could tell you, yeah, qualitatively what group to vaccinate and the
So,
impact that that would have overall. So there were kinds of things it was good at and kind of things it wasn't for at all.
so there's stuff that is really good and you can predict and you can figure out. And then there's the other side, which you can't rely on,
Yeah.
which
So when
makes
we talk
sense.
about a prediction target, you know, a validation target, what does it mean for this thing to actually work right? Usually doesn't mean that it hits some number exactly, but it means that if in the real world there is a phase change, the model shows the same kind of phase change. Um, if if in the if in the real world something is some attitude that you'd think would be easy to change is harder to change than anybody would think, and in your model you see that the setup kind of resists change that same way, that would look like a valid model.
Okay. Makes sense.
It again explains why and how,
It
but
gives you
doesn't really
answers,
make point predictions.
but it gives you answers to the bigger pictures in a way.
That's right. That's right.
I only have
And
a,
once you really understand how, then you sometimes go to some other kind of model, a differential equation model, or a
that's more
algebraic,
specific.
statistical model. Now that you know how it works, you can then be specific and say, okay, given that it works that way,
Dive
how
into
do I make a
that
prediction?
specific. So you can
But
dive
usually
more
we don't.
into
Usually we think we know how things work and we don't.
that's
It's
true.
hard to really know how the real world works.
Yeah. Would you say there's a favorite model you've created or favorite thing you've worked on?
I should I should have a good answer for that. I mean, my favorite thing right now, actually, I guess it's two things. I've been having a lot of fun dabbling in the modern AI LLM world, but merging it with these agent-based models. So the first thing I did along those lines is I made a model, actually along with Aaron Frank and Ryan Brown. We made a model that was a simulation of a high school classroom in Minneapolis that had some Somali immigrants in it. And of the 27 students, I think there were five Somali immigrants, four of whom were adjusting just fine. I mean, it's challenging, right? There's race, there's
Yeah.
religion, there's immigration status.
Change.
None of it's easy, and it wasn't easy. Yeah, they simulated for their simulated personas. It wasn't easy, but there was one guy who was a little mentally unstable to begin with, having a really hard time adjusting, and was actually on the edge of radicalization and was thinking about going overseas and joining ISIL, which actually happened in Minneapolis. That's why we set the simulation there. There were a group of guys who were into video games, and then they got into being jihadists and tried to go to Iraq to join the fight, and and they got intercepted, and it was a big mess. So it's like, okay, what? How can it happen? How does somebody end up getting pushed over the edge like that? And so we developed this set of big personality profiles, about four to 8 pages long, describing their big five personality traits, for each person. What's their openness to experience? What's their neuroticism? These various kind of standard psychological things. Also, though, their backstory. What's their socioeconomic status? What are their motivations? What are their dreams? What are they what do they enjoy most about their life? What do they enjoy least about their life? How do they think about themselves? And we created these elaborate personas for each of the 27 students, and then created a simulation where they talk to each other. They come in and they sit down at desks. Of course, that's all represented in a
Yeah.
very light way. And then they are presented with a newspaper, a made up news story about how the federal government is cracking down on ISIL supporters, and very polarizing. And they each read it, and actually there was another kid in the class who was on the edge of white nationalist radicalization. He read it and was like, "Yeah, that's America. You gotta keep this. And then the all of the Somalis were like, "Well, gee, this isn't. You shouldn't crack down on us just because we're from Somalia." And then they each took turns talking, saying something about it, reacting to their take. Like they read the thing and they wrote a 3 paragraph thing, and then they kept that in memory. And when they spoke, they didn't speak from the article; they spoke from their 3 paragraph take on it. And then they formed memories. And at night, after hearing all this discussion, they'd go home and consolidate all the memories into what they remembered about yesterday, much shorter. Some people would remember some things, some would remember other things, depending on their background. And then they'd come back and talk again. Sometimes they'd break up into tables and just talk at the table. And the game was to try to figure out, what can you do that pushes Ahmed over the edge or doesn't? Can you have him should he sit with the moderate Somalis who he trusts? Should he sit with the most popular kids who everybody likes? Should he sit with the people he disagrees with most so that he hears their opinion more and maybe he gets shifted over toward them? And so that was of course, in real life, you can't do this experiment. You
No,
can't take a
no,
high school kid and say, well, how hard
no.
can we push him before he snaps? I mean, of course, high schools are trying to do that all the time, but
Yeah, but
school itself isn't trying to do
you
that. It's
can't.
just the social environment. So that was and we didn't get to the point, we didn't get funding to really do it as a proper study, but we did publish some stuff. And I think we advanced this idea that there's at least potential for for the large language models to be, I like the term, a sociolinguistic hologram. You know, a hologram, you look at it from different angles and you see different
Yeah.
things, see different sides of the thing. And an LLM, if you just ask it a question, it'll give you a weird answer.
Mhm.
White, educated, I forget what weird stands for, but it'll answer like a white college professor, but or like a Silicon Valley tech bro maybe. But if you give it more context, you are here are a bunch of characteristics. Here's a bunch of things about your life. How do you answer this question? It will actually give quite a different answer. And the thought is that it's read everything. It's composed
Mhm.
of all the text that's out there, and there's maybe enough text in there that it can actually give a legitimate perspective of different people if we can design the prompting right to really elicit
Yeah.
what somebody like that might say. We didn't answer that question, but I think we managed to frame it well enough that others can do research on it.
It's crazy how you can do the modeling from the thing to COVID to this. It's like there's
Yeah,
so much you
yeah. I
can
mean,
do it on.
that is the method is good that way, and the think tank was good that way also. Though
Yeah.
turning the stuff that was easiest to get. I spent most of my time the last couple of years figuring out how much to reimburse hospitals for COVID expenses. Just a mix of kind of law and accounting, super boring. Important, $1 billion at stake,
Yeah.
but super boring.
Boring
And
compared
then
to
you do something like this that's super cool and really fun and interesting. Nobody wants to pay for it.
yeah.
So we kind of had cover to do. We did a couple of weeks of work on it, and then we kind of had to
Go.
let it go. Yeah.
So my final question for you is what do you see the models being in the future? Do you see that being a big part? And then also with the AI?
Yeah. Okay. Well, that gets to the other model that I've been enjoying lately. Um, uh, I in anticipation of this job that I hope to start soon, I wrote an AI thing that pulls a bunch of data and makes a synthetic population. Who lives in which houses with their incomes and ages and races and everything, all approximately the way the real population is.
Hmm.
But they also have a friend network, and they have a workplace, and they have places where they shop, and all these things are selected kind of the way that social science can do it best. Then on top of that, there's something called SimForge, where a someone like a mayor can say, "Hey, people in my town are dying from, or I'm afraid they're going to die from COVID. What should I do?" And it says, "Well, yeah, I hear that concern, but we need to turn this into a modeling question. What are you really contemplating needing to do?" And the way in my test dialogue worked, would come back and say, "Well, the people are telling me I should close the schools in the fall, but it seems to me that old people are the most vulnerable. So I don't know why I should even do that." And then it comes back and says, "Well, that's a good modeling question. Would closing the schools prevent enough spread to actually be worth it? Or, because you're going to lose some
Would
education."
it
So it has
not?
this dialogue back and forth. And then based on templates that I've built in, based on my years of doing this, just having the prompts make sure that the question is refined properly. And it basically asks enough questions to fully define what the model should do. And then it writes it
Oh,
and it runs it. And it actually looks at the charts and things that come out of it and refines them. It goes through a refinement step before it even shows them to you. If one thing is so big that it's that all the other values are down at the bottom, it'll put it on a
fix
different
it.
axis or put it on a different chart or something,
Yeah.
fix all the charts, and then show you an agent-based analysis on your town from your presumably pretty well-informed description of the problem, but as a non-modeler. And I do think that that's going to be a big part of the way things go in the future, that you won't have the expert spends an hour talking to the modeling expert. The subject matter expert and the modeling expert spend an hour or two together.
Mhm.
the modeling expert goes away for a week or two, then you meet again, and the subject matter expert says, no, no, that's not the way it is at all. And you revise it and you try to go back and forth until you get it done. It's very expensive. It's very
Yeah.
slow, hard to
Long
get people to commit
process.
to doing it. And so my goal with this is to cut the engineer out of the loop and let the decision maker work with the model directly.
Okay.
Because most of the learning I find comes not from the results, but from the process of putting the model together.
Yeah.
You learn how things are hooked together in a way that doesn't come through in a PowerPoint. You have to actually
Do
be
it
involved with the modeling to really learn a lot of the lessons.
and
And it's frustrating
understand.
because as the engineer, I'm building the model and I learn all these things, and then I feel like I didn't really communicate it to the actual stakeholder. They heard it, but they didn't really understand it. They didn't really stick with them. They didn't really care.
Yeah.
But if they built it, if they were
They'd
part of building
understand
it,
it.
they'd understand it better. So I think that's the most interesting new direction I've seen recently. That's where I'm putting my energy.
That's very interesting. I found it all really interesting, to be honest.
Thanks.
It's
Yeah,
not something you
I found
think
it all
about.
really interesting.
It's not
Yeah.
something you think about on a daily basis. You don't think about the models running in the background, figuring out the different facts. You kind of just think one way, like COVID this way, and then you realize that what you were thinking is totally wrong.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's right. Building building these models. I mean, the great thing about an agent-based model is also the bad thing about an agent-based model. It's very unconstrained. Most modeling is defined by what its limits are. In a
Mhm.
differential equation model, you have to use differential equations. It's a statistical model. There's a bag of statistical tricks you can use, but there are other things you can't do where it's not a statistical model. And there's a whole big family, it's a whole taxonomy. Agent-based models can basically use all these things. There's almost no rules,
Yeah.
which means they can be completely unruly. There's no good way to calibrate things, super messy. On the other hand, very expressive. You can represent anything if you can figure out how to do it and how to interpret the result. And so by by trying to wrestle this woolly model to the point where it actually shows you what you need to see, you end up refining your mental model. You realize there are
You
things you
learn
were
a
silly
lot
over. Yeah,
in the
you realize
process.
there were things you thought were fixed that aren't fixed. There are things you thought didn't matter that did matter. The things you thought mattered that don't matter. And your mental model gets hugely refined in order to get
Changes.
from the things you think are the inputs to the things you think should be the outputs. How do you get from input to output? Your first guess on that, even if it's a pretty good guess, is
Still
always
could be wrong. Yeah.
somewhat wrong.
Yeah.
You learn a lot. Your mental model gets refined by just making the inputs get transformed into the outputs and actually seeing all the steps. Because if you leave any steps out, it doesn't work. That's how
Yeah.
computers are.
As you learn as you go with it,
Yeah.
which makes total sense. Wow. That was
Yeah.
really interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a fun. Well, how long have I been doing this? I've been doing this for 25 years now. The GIS, I mean, not
Yeah.
the GIS part. I was doing the GIS for 10 years before that, but the kind of the complex systems policy modeling. And I really started in 2000. And so far, I'm getting toward the later end of my career. And assuming this next job comes through, I think I get to spend my whole career doing this kind of thing,
Nice.
which is pretty
Well,
great. I really enjoy it.
can't complain.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it, and I definitely
Good.
learned a lot.
Great. Well, it was fun talking to you. And
Thank you.
if you want to talk in the future, thanks. Bye.
Thank you.